Morality is just herd instinct. Nietzsche's shocking claim, have you ever stopped and asked yourself why you believe what you believe is good? Why certain actions feel noble, why others seem shameful, and why, without even thinking, we judge people who step outside those lines. What if I told you that what you call morality isn't some eternal truth or divine commandment, but just a deeply conditioned instinct? Not yours specifically, but the herd's. That's right. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most explosive and misunderstood philosophers in history, claimed that most of what we call morality is nothing more than the instinct of the herd, of the crowd, the masses trying to survive by suppressing the strong, the different. And once you begin to see this, you start to question everything, your values, your guilt, your sense of right and wrong. You start to realize that morality, the very compass we live by, might not be pointing north. It might just be pointing to safety. Now, I know that's a big claim, but let's walk through it together, because Nietzsche didn't arrive at this conclusion lightly. He spent his life watching humanity from a kind of distance, like someone who had stepped outside the cave and could now see the shadows for what they were. He asked, why do we call humility a virtue? Why is obedience praised? Why do we look at ambition and power with suspicion? Most people assumed those values were simply good, but Nietzsche didn't buy it. He believed they were the result of centuries of psychological conditioning shaped by the weak to control the strong. Think about it. In a herd, the group survives by sticking together. Unity is safety. Rebellion is danger. If one animal breaks from the group, it puts everyone at risk. So over time, the herd develops instincts not through logic, but through necessity. Very instincts that say, don't stand out. Don't question. Don't rise too high. And those instincts, Nietzsche believed, eventually became morality. Not because they were true or noble, but because they were useful. Useful for survival. Useful for the group. Useful for the many.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Nietzsche argued that the morality of the herd punishes those who are different, those who are strong, those who dare to create their own values. He called this slave morality a morality born not from strength, but from resentment. The weak, unable to wield power directly, redefine goodness to mean submission, meekness, equality, not because those things are noble, but because they level the playing field. And what they fear most is someone who steps outside, that's someone who says, I will decide for myself what is good. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, are the values I live by truly mine? Or were they handed to me by a society that rewards conformity? This is where Nietzsche's critique becomes not just philosophical, but personal. Because he's not saying be evil or ignore all morality. He's saying wake up, see morality for what it is. Realize that the values you've internalized about success, about selflessness, about love and guilt and sin might not be based on truth. They might be based on the fear of standing out, the fear of being different, the fear of becoming yourself. Nietzsche believed that most people are terrified of freedom. Not political freedom, but existential freedom, the freedom to create your own values, to live without the safety net of herd morality. Because once you step outside the herd, there's no one to tell you what's right. No one to affirm your goodness. No one to catch you if you fall. It's just you, your will, and the terrifying responsibility of being the author of your own life. And that's too much for most people. So they stay in the herd, they follow the rules. They call that being good. But Nietzsche saw it for what it was, fear in disguise. Let's get even more real. How many times have you felt guilty for wanting something bold or ambitious or unconventional? How many times have you told yourself, I shouldn't think this way, not because it's wrong, but because it's different? That's the herd instinct at work. That's morality whispering, stay in line. And Nietzsche's genius was in showing us that we don't have to listen and that we can question those whispers. That we can forge our own path, not with arrogance, but with honesty. But here's where the real challenge begins. Because if we reject herd morality, what then? If we stop believing in the rules society has given us, how do we know what's right? How do we avoid falling into chaos or selfishness or worse? Nietzsche didn't just tear things down, he wanted to build something higher, something more powerful, something he called the revaluation of all values. But to get there, we first have to understand the full force of the herd's grip on our minds. So I want to leave you with this question. If morality is just a herd instinct, what happens when you stop following the herd? Who are you really without those inherited values? Next, we're going to explore the psychological roots of morality, how guilt, shame, and obedience were engineered into us over generations, and how Nietzsche believed we could begin to break free. The invention of guilt, how morality was engineered into you. Let's go deeper now into the machinery behind morality. The gears, the levers, the hidden programming that makes you feel guilty when you think something wrong, even if no one else ever knows you thought it. Nietzsche had disbelieved morality was the herd instinct dressed up in holy robes. He believed it was engineered into us deliberately, strategically over generations. And the tool that made it stick? Guilt. Not just the feeling of regret when we hurt someone, but something more insidious, the deep, internalized belief that our very impulses, our natural instincts are bad. That to be ourselves is somehow sinful. And here's the terrifying part, you didn't choose this programming. It was etched into your psyche long before you had the ability to question it. Nietzsche traces this back to what he called the genealogy of morals. He asked, if morality isn't eternal, where did it come from? Who invented it, and why? His answer was as brilliant as it was brutal. In the earliest human societies, values were shaped by the powerful, the warriors, the conquerors, the creators. Strength was good. Power was admired. To be noble was to live boldly, to act without shame, to affirm life. But at some point, everything flipped. The strong were condemned. The meek were praised. And this shift, Nietzsche argued, was not an evolution of compassion, it was a revolution of resentment. Imagine being weak, oppressed, powerless. You can't win in physical strength, so what do? You change the rules, you redefine strength as evil and weakness as virtue. You turn your suffering into a moral badge of honor. And over time, that redefinition becomes morality itself. Nietzsche called this slave morality a moral system born from the revenge of the powerless. And once it took hold, it had to be preserved. So how do you maintain control over generations of people who might have dangerous instincts, ambition, desire, pride? You teach them to hate those instincts. You teach them that to even think those thoughts is wrong. You don't need external chains anymore. You build the prison inside their minds. That's guilt. That's the invention of moral conscience. Nietzsche called it the internalization of man. He saw that once we moved from warrior societies to more civilized ones, we couldn't act on our instincts the same way. We couldn't lash out or take what we wanted or dominate. So instead, we turned that energy inward. We began to punish ourselves. That's what guilt is, instinct turned against the self. The loop of self-surveillance so powerful that even when no one is watching, you watch yourself. You censor your thoughts, you shrink your desires. You kneel to values you never chose. Think about it, how often do you feel bad for things you haven't even done? How often do you label your feelings as wrong before they have a chance to breathe? That voice in your head that says, you shouldn't want this. You shouldn't think that. You should be ashamed. Whose voice is that, really? Is it yours? Or is it the echo of centuries of programming passed down through religion, education, culture, family? Nietzsche believed most people live their entire lives inside that echo chamber, confusing obedience for virtue and self-repression for morality. But here's the paradox, guilt feels moral. It feels righteous. It feels like the conscience doing its job. That's why it's so hard to question. Because if you challenge guilt, it feels like you're challenging goodness itself. But Nietzsche pushes us to ask, what if your guilt is not a sign of conscience, but a symptom of manipulation? What if it's not truth, but trauma disguised as ethics? This isn't just abstract philosophy. This is your life, because if you don't question where your values come from, they will control you. They will limit you. They will keep you small. And you'll think that's just the price of being good. But good by whose standards? Nietzsche's brilliance wasn't just in diagnosing the problem, but in daring us to ask the forbidden question, what if I'm not wrong? What if my instincts aren't evil? What if I've been lied to about what it means to be moral? Now, he wasn't saying we should all become selfish monsters. He wasn't promoting chaos or cruelty. He was saying we must become conscious aware of the values we've inherited and willing to discard the ones that no longer serve our growth. Because true morality for Nietzsche isn't about following rules, it's about creating values. It's about becoming strong enough to live without guilt, without inherited shame, without the invisible leash of herd morality pulling at your neck every time you try to rise. It's terrifying, and it's liberating. So I'll ask you directly, what part of your so-called morality is actually guilt wearing a mask? And what would happen if you took that mask off? Next, we'll explore Nietzsche's most radical idea, yet the concept of the Übermensch, the one who creates values instead of obeying them. We'll ask what it means to become the kind of person who doesn't need the herd anymore. Becoming the creator, Nietzsche's Übermensch, and the death of old morality so far. We've torn down a lot. We've peeled back the surface of morality to reveal the herd instinct underneath. We've exposed guilt and conscience as tools of control, not truth. But Nietzsche didn't want us to stop there. He wasn't a nihilist in the way many people misunderstand him. He didn't believe life was meaningless, he believed it was up to us to give it meaning. When the old morality collapses, when the gods die and the inherited values crumble, what are we left with? A void, yes, but also a question. A challenge. A blank canvas. And Nietzsche gives that challenge a name, the Übermensch, the overman, the one who overcomes the herd, the guilt, the inherited morality, and becomes a creator of values. This is where things get dangerous in the best possible way. Because Nietzsche's Übermensch isn't a superhero or a tyrant. He's not someone with more power than others, he's someone with more responsibility. When you no longer outsource your morals to religion, to society, to tradition, you have to build your own compass. You have to decide what's worth living for, what's worth dying for, and what it means to live fully awake. And that's terrifying. Because there's no one left to blame. No external authority to hide behind. No moral map drawn for you. Just you, your will, and the raw chaos of existence. But in that chaos is the seed of something divine. The Übermensch is not a destination, it's a process. It's the lifelong act of becoming. Art of rising above the passive life that obeys and conform, and choosing instead to affirm life not as it should be, but as it is with all its suffering, uncertainty, and beauty. Nietzsche said, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. That's not abstract poetry, that's a radical call to live in this world, not the next. To create meaning not from dogma, but from experience. To stop condemning life for not fitting into our moral systems and start dancing with it, embracing it, shaping it. But here's the part that stings. The path to becoming the Übermensch begins with the death of God. Not just the literal death of religious belief, but the death of all external, unquestioned authorities. The death of every moral system that tells you what to do without asking who you are. Nietzsche didn't celebrate this death, he mourned it. Because when God dies, when absolute morality dissolves, most people don't become free, they become lost. They fall into nihilism. They say, if there are no rules, then nothing matters. But Nietzsche says, no, that's just step one. That's the clearing of the ground. Now you must build something new, something personal, powerful, and real. Ask yourself, what would it look like to live by values you created yourself, not values you inherited or copied or were guilted into? What part of your life would change? What part of you would finally wake up? This is not a path for everyone. Most people will never take it. They'll cling to the comfort of herd morality even if it makes them miserable. They'll choose obedience over freedom, shame over power, guilt over growth. But some people, maybe you will feel the pull of something deeper. A voice inside that says, there has to be more than this. That voice is dangerous. It's also sacred. It's the beginning of your journey to becoming a creator. Nietzsche believed that suffering was not a curse, it was a crucible. The Übermensch doesn't seek comfort, he seeks transformation. He doesn't avoid pain, he uses it. He turns wounds into wisdom. He doesn't ask, what is the right thing to do according to society? He asks, what can I become if I face this fully? It's not about being better than others, it's about being better than you were yesterday. About refusing to live a life of quiet obedience and instead choosing to live a life of radical authenticity. And yes, it's lonely. When you leave the herd, there's no one to walk ahead of you. You become your own path. But in that loneliness, there's also a kind of sacred clarity, a sense of inner alignment that no external validation can match. You start to feel what Nietzsche called the great noon, the moment when the sun of your own truth is directly overhead, and you no longer cast shadows of self-doubt. It doesn't last forever. But when it comes, you're alive in a way most people never touch. So I'll ask you again, are you willing to become the author of your own morality, even if it means destroying everything you once called sacred? Can you live without the comfort of rules and instead create meaning from the chaos of existence? In the final part, we'll bring it all together. We'll explore what happens when you truly break free from herd morality, how to live with power, compassion, and truth without falling into ego or despair. We'll ask how to become a light in the darkness, not by following old maps, but by forging new ones from your own fire. Living beyond good and evil, how to be free in a world that fears freedom, so here we are. We've questioned the roots of morality, exposed guilt as a tool of control, and glimpsed the terrifying freedom of becoming a value creator. But what does it actually mean to live beyond good and evil? How do we walk through the world once we've stepped outside the herd? Once we've stopped believing in inherited values? Once we've killed our gods and abandoned the moral scaffolding we were raised on? First, it means understanding that freedom isn't chaos. Nietzsche never meant that living beyond good and evil was a free pass to do whatever you want. That's a shallow misunderstanding. Real freedom isn't about indulgence, it's about responsibility. When you're no longer being told what's right or wrong by society, religion, or tradition, you become responsible for deciding it yourself. Every action becomes a mirror. Every decision becomes a declaration of who you are. You're not following a script anymore, you're writing one line by line with your life. But here's the catch. The world will hate this. It fears people who are truly free, not because they're dangerous, but because they're unpredictable. The herd depends on predictability, on everyone playing their part. When you break from that, you force others to confront their own confinement. Your freedom becomes a threat to their obedience. So don't expect applause, expect resistance. Expect misunderstanding, but also expect a kind of inner peace that no amount of external validation can give you. Living beyond good and evil also means seeing the world more clearly. When you stop dividing everything into black and white good Vs, bad moral VS. Immoral, you begin to see the complexity of life. You stop judging so quickly. You become more curious, more compassionate, not less. You begin to understand that people are not merely good or evil. They are struggling, reacting, surviving, evolving, including you. And that understanding gives you space to breathe, to grow, to become. But you also become powerful, not in the egoic, self-aggrandizing way, in the quiet, grounded sense of knowing who you are. When you live beyond the herd, you stop asking for permission. You stop needing approval. You start to act from your center, not from fear or guilt or the need to fit in. And that kind of power is magnetic. It doesn't dominate, it inspires, it awakens. It lights fires in others who are silently yearning for the same freedom. And this brings us to the final, most important point. Living beyond good and evil doesn't mean living without love. In fact, it might be the only way to truly love. Because when you remove the moral filters, when you stop loving people because you should or because they're good, you start loving them for who they are. You see them without judgment, you meet them without pretense, and you offer them something rare, authentic presence. No conditions, no roles, just truth. So, what does this life look like in practice? It looks like someone who questions instead of obeys, who creates instead of conforms, who faces the chaos of existence not with fear, but with fierce honesty. Someone who doesn't deny their desires but channels them into something higher. Someone who forgives themselves not because they're perfect, but because they've stopped pretending to be. It's not easy, but it's real. And in a world drowning in illusion, realness is a revolution. Nietzsche didn't give us answers, he gave us tools. He gave us a hammer to smash the idols we never knew we were worshiping. But now it's up to you. Will you take that hammer and build something new? Or will you return to the safety of the herd, the comfort of guilt, the illusion of morality? Ask yourself one last question. If you no longer had to be good, who would you finally become? That's where your journey begins.